Great. So welcome to This Is Not a Drill. My name is Melina Abdullah. I'm co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. And every Thursday at 7 o'clock, we're right here on Facebook Live talking about issues that are important to the liberation of Black people. We're grateful today to have joining us the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors. We're also grateful to have who I call Mama Paula. But for the rest of you, you can call her Paula Minor, Miss Minor. She is one of our leads for Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. And joining us in just a bit is Sister Helen Jones, the mother of John Horton. Tonight, we're going to be talking about LA County Sheriff's Department and the unit that I believe is the most corrupt, most murderous, most problematic law enforcement unit in the country. And that's difficult to say when you live in Los Angeles and live under the boot of LAPD. LA County Sheriffs under this particular sheriff, Sheriff Villanueva, has become one of the worst, if not the worst, law enforcement unit in the nation. And we'll talk about that history. We'll talk about what they're doing, what makes them so corrupt with our guests tonight. I just want everybody to remember that the work that we're doing as Black Lives Matter is ongoing. So we are continuing to do work. We're continuing to say that we need to both protest and engage in electoral politics. And so an election is coming up. One of the ways we got Villanueva is some people voted him in. I would say that was not me, right? Not that I voted for the other one either, but it was not me. I never cast a ballot for Alex Villanueva. But some people did because he fooled a lot of people. And just like our district attorney, this district attorney, Jackie Lacey, has fooled a lot of people, and it's resulted in the death of 622 people at the hands of law enforcement since she's been in office. We have an opportunity in November 3rd, to vote her out. We have an opportunity to vote her out on November 3rd. Absentee ballots, vote by mail ballots are going to begin going in on October 5th. So just a couple of weeks from now, we're going to start sending in vote by mail ballots. So make sure you are registered to vote. Even if you think, hey, I don't really believe in electoral politics, give yourself the option. Give yourself the option so that you can at least cast a ballot. Cast a ballot if you're not voting for president. You know, I get it. You know, we have the worst possible occupant of the White House in office right now, but you know, some people would say Joe Biden isn't much better, and I feel you on that. So even if you're not voting for the top of the ticket, think about how those down ballot items affect you, including Measure J, which will permanently reallocate about 10% of the county funds to the things that would actually keep us safe, like housing and mental health, good jobs, those kinds of things. So you have an opportunity to vote yes on J. Last week, we were with our family from Initiate Justice, who was talking about the importance of Prop 17 and restoring voting rights to those who've already served out their prison terms, and the importance of restoring voting rights to them. So again, it's really important that we vote. Just a reminder that this is not a drill, and we're here every Thursday at 7 o'clock, and we're thankful to Pro Bono ASL, which partners with us now pretty much on everything Black Lives Matter does. They're definitely here for every episode of This Is Not a Drill. Thank you so much for joining us. Ashley is our translator right now, and she'll switch in and out. And I also want to say a special thanks to Mac for buying me a ring light because he was sick of seeing me sit in the dark. So thank you, Mac, who is one of our translators, and he saw me struggling last week and yesterday at the Lacey Must Go protest. He said, here, you're not sitting in the dark no more. So thank you so much, Mac. I want to start, when I first met Patrisse Cullors, she was organizing around ending sheriff's violence, the Coalition to End Sheriff's Violence. We've been friends and comrades for a long time, way before there was a Black Lives Matter. And I remember Patrisse, me being really struck by the authenticity of your spirit and the way in which you stepped into this work really prompted by your brother Monty and what was happening to him, the way in which he was mistreated by the jail system, by the lack of mental health resources, by the criminalization of Black people. And you made a call that, you know, this is unacceptable, not just for Monty, but for everyone. And you really talked about the sheriff's violence, both inside the jail as well as outside the jail. And it's through your work, we now have a civilian oversight commission that is supposed to oversee the sheriff and hold them accountable. You know, today, the Civilian Oversight Commission did open its mouth and use its voice to really come down pretty hard on Sheriff Villanueva. And I think that that's a testament. We need to remember that elected and appointed officials only do what they're pressured to do. It's always the people who usher in change. And we're thankful to you, Patrisse, for really initiating and visioning the Civilian Oversight Commission. Can you start just by grounding us in this work, grounding us and helping us to understand? People think LAPD and LA County sheriffs are the same thing. They don't understand the role of the sheriffs both inside the jails and outside. Can you tell us a little bit about that work that you've done?
Sure, thank you, Melina. And thank you, team. So grateful to be on This Is Not a Drill. I love this show. It's like my new favorite show. And I'm always so grateful for your clarity and responsiveness, Melina, in these moments of uprising, and know that This Is Not a Drill is really birthed in this moment because people needed to hear about what was happening from us in real time. There's so much misinformation and disinformation about Black Lives Matter and the work that we do. And this show, you get to hear from us and our team and people we trust about what we're up to and what we're doing. So let's talk about the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. One of the things that's so important about LASD, which is what I'll be calling them throughout the show, is that LASD is in charge of many, many things. The Sheriff's Department is in charge of the jail system. The sheriff is contracted police for dozens of cities throughout LA County. The sheriff is in charge of the courts. They're in charge of they're in charge of policing for the Los Angeles Community College District. They're in charge of policing for parks and recs. So they are, they're in charge of policing for all county facilities, including county hospitals. So they're in charge of a lot of places and spaces in our lives, especially Black and poor people. So that's kind of, you know, the breadth of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. They have a $3 billion budget. Yes, billions of dollars at their discrepancy. And they are and have been one of the worst departments inside of the country and very much inside of LA County. They've been almost lawless. I call them, you know, they really operate like the wild, wild west. And up until 2016, there was no independent oversight of the largest sheriff's department in the country. So just 4 years ago, they received oversight. And in that fight for sheriff oversight, we did not actually win all the things we needed to win so that our oversight body had all the legal power it could have, such as subpoena power. We just won that with Measure R this past March. So for the last 100 years, which is for about as long as a sheriff's department has existed, it has been a department that has never had to deal with any sort of accountability or oversight. So it's why we're in the position we are today with a sheriff who doesn't feel any issues with treating the community like dirt, saying things that are terrible and awful, and he knows he can get away with it because he has been protected and the sheriff's department has been protected. The sheriff has been sued over and over and over again. both by the ACLU SoCal, the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California. In fact, the first lawsuit against the Sheriff's Department was in the 1970s around jail conditions. So there's always been a history of really, am I allowed to curse on the show? Okay, really?
Yes, absolutely. Do you know me? Right.
Just gotta ask. There's always been a history of really fucked up conditions inside the jail system, led by the Sheriff's Department. And there's always been communities of people fighting it back. So we're not the first group to fight back, but we were one of the first groups to actually bring families and communities who've been impacted by the Sheriff's Department to come together and challenge the sheriffs and the county board of supervisors in particular to do more for people inside. And so that kind of gives you the framework of what we've done, of what our work has led up to. In the last 8 years, right before Black Lives Matter, I started an organization called Dignity and Power Now, which is now the organization that really does take on the sheriffs, specifically around the jails and incarceration. But we've obviously been doing work closely alongside of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles around the killings of Black people in particular, but also brown people at the hands of the Sheriff's Department. So this is a frightening department. If you all just go on LA Times and look up LA Sheriff's Department and look up all the articles that span back decades of a history of deputy cliques, a history of neo-Nazi gangs inside the Sheriff's Department, a history of killing Black and brown people on purpose so they can gain their stripes. I mean, this is a very, very disturbingly gruesome department. And in my opinion, we need to dismantle this department. This department, just like they did in Minneapolis, this department should no longer exist.
I just want to underscore what you said, because before we go to Mama Paula and we talk about the overabundance of law enforcement units in LA County and the LA County sheriffs being so problematic and having such far-reaching authority, I want to underscore something you just said, Patrisse, because you talked about deputy cliques. We're really talking about gangs inside the sheriff's departments. So it's important for our viewers to understand that these law enforcement units, and this largest of the law enforcement units in LA County, is actually engaging in the criminal behavior that most people think they're charged with putting down. They are the gang members themselves, right? So we can talk about the recent whistleblower who talked about the executioners coming out of the Compton Sheriff's Department. We know that Anthony Vargas was likely murdered by, which gang was that? Was that the Bandidos? The Bandidos, right? Coming out of Boyle Heights. We can talk about the Jump Out Boys, right? These are gangs. They're actually initiated just like, I'm not gonna say it, you say it. They're initiated like gang members, right? They pull off, their gang is called the executioners. What do you think they have to do in order to become a member of that gang that they're tatted up for? That talk about what you mean when you talk about deputy cliques and gangs. I think people don't fully understand what exactly we're talking about and how deep that runs, that it comes from, you know, back, if you go back to the 1950s, they were actually recruiting sheriff's deputies from KKK rallies in the South. This is intentional and deliberate, right? Can you talk about those gangs within the Sheriff's Department?
Yeah, well, yes. So thank you, Melina, for kind of like drilling down on this. We are talking about a Sheriff's Department that actually brought Southern law enforcement, brought white boys from the South to be the first deputies to populate the sheriffs. And so we talk about California as liberal California and the place where it's a safe haven for us. But in fact, we have to remember that many of these departments were actually trained by Southern law enforcement departments. in the last several years, I would say in the last decade, we've seen the reporting and the deep dive investigation of these deputy gangs and deputy cliques that have relationships and ideology of white supremacist ideology. And so one of the gangs that became very popular was the 3000 Boys, and they had it tattooed on the back of their neck, and they were inside of the jail facilities. They were known for breaking people's bones, incarcerated people's bones, body parts, carving into people's bodies. My brother was brutally beat. That's who my brother was brutally beaten by, was by sheriff deputies inside of those jails that were, these are not incidences that are an anomaly. These are, and this is why, to me, it's not abuse, because abuse is what happens often, on accident, or it's not perpetuated. This is torture. This department is a department that actually tortures human beings, and we have to call it that because we live in a country that doesn't believe that we commit torture, but that's exactly what the sheriff's department does. And it privileges people who are inside of these deputy gangs. And so at this point, high-ranking officers, and some even say Sheriff Villanueva himself is a part of a deputy gang. Paul Tanaka, who was the former undersheriff of Sheriff Lee Baca, who's now in federal prison. Paul Tanaka was a part of a neo-Nazi gang. Yes, he does not sound white because he wasn't. He's Japanese. But everybody knows that once you go inside of law enforcement, you are no longer of color. You are now a white supremacist operative.
So there's at least 9 sheriff's gangs, right? We have the Little Devils, we have the 3000 Boys, SWAT Mafia, South Central Reapers, the Linwood Vikings, the Century Regulators, the Jump Out Boys, the East LA Banditos, the Century Spartans, and the Compton Executioners. These are not football teams. These are gangs within the sheriff's department that deliberately engage in acts of torture within the jails and within our communities. I want to pull Paula Miner into this conversation. Mama Paula, as I call her, has been leading the police oversight, the police accountability team for Black Lives Matter for the last several years. She's been involved in both the Civilian Oversight Commission and making sure that we have a presence when they meet and pulling them towards the community and away from sheriff's deputies, as well as pulling LAPD towards the community, or LA Police Commission, reminding them that they're supposed to be beholden to the people, not the police. Mama Paula is also the brilliant mind who said, you know what, we need to put some pressure on Jackie Lacey in an ongoing way. And so you can see from her t-shirt, by Jackie 2020, that was Mama Paula's call 3 years ago when she said, we need to be in front of her office every single week in the names of all of those people who we call. And, as we talk about sheriff's violence, we can talk about beatings of folks and the way in which they're violent, but we also need to talk about the theft of life. And when we talk about folks like Ryan Twyman and Dejan Kazee and Andres Guardado and John Horton and Quentin Thomas and so many others whose lives have been stolen at the hands of the LA County Sheriffs. Mama Paula, welcome, and thank you so much for your vision and for your work. And what can you tell us about this history of sheriff's violence and the way in which they kind of meted out upon our communities now?
Yes, and I just like to add some more statistics. There are actually 17 documented sheriff's gangs. The first one that really achieved media attention was in 1971, nearly 50 years ago. And that was the, what is it called? Oh, I just lost it. But the Little Devils operated out of the East LA station. And the East LA station has been known to harbor numerous gangs, typically with with LASD, they do not allow women and they do not allow Black officers to join these gangs. And so we need to kind of know a little bit about who are these sheriff officers. There's about, according to recent documents, about 18,000 employees with LASD. 43% of them are Latinx and 41% are white. About 9% are Black, and the rest are Asian and others. So it's interesting to know the demographics of the officers that are reigning with terror in our community, that are terrorizing the families of victims that they have shot, and that are continuing to perpetuate these gangs. There is a study that's going to come out, I think, in the next few months that's really going to talk in depth about these gangs and some of the things that they have done and continue to do. And the community has said that our current sheriff, Sheriff Villanueva, had to be a member of Bandidos because he worked for decades in the East LA station. And often officers did not get promotions, did not get special schedules or whatever it is they wanted to do within the sheriff's department unless they belonged to the controlling gang. So when we talk about LASD, they have decades of terror, decades of lack of accountability. And one of the things I want to talk about too is that, you know, the sheriff today had that long, nearly hour, I think it might have been a little over an hour press conference about the shooting of Dijon Kizzee. Normally, they do not have press conferences about their shootings. LA sheriff has shot and killed 8 people since May 25th, which was the murder of George Floyd. We have not heard about those other 7 people, but because of, as Patrisse said earlier, the actions of the Civilian Oversight Committee and other members of the community calling for the sheriff's resignation, he decided to come out with this press conference and talk about this one killing. They have a pattern of harassing the families of those they have killed. This harassment includes unnecessary stops and detaining of family members, actually detaining them. It's been documented, 20, 30 minutes running their paperwork every week, repeatedly driving by their houses, making threatening remarks and making threatening gestures. And so one of the things that we talk about in Black Lives Matter, that the group that tries to monitor and advocate for change in police, one of our teams is called a police accountability team. There, at this moment, is no accountability. There is no blame. There's Sheriff Villanueva does not hold his officers accountable, and Jackie Lacey does not prosecute officers. And a significant number of these killings of citizens in LA are clearly questionable. You know, it's not a matter of people shooting back and forth. They are clearly questionable, unnecessary shootings where the sheriff is using this unnecessary, brutal tactics while they're trying to apprehend a person, or while they are really just disturbing, stealing somebody's life. So I just want to say that we continue to advocate for the families. We continue to try to intervene wherever we can. But I think the thing that the Civilian Oversight Committee and a member of the Board of Supervisors said today is that Alex Villanueva must go. He does not hold himself accountable to anybody. And he is like our junior Donald Trump. You know, he feels like that he is a dictator. And because of his attitude, his officers are unbelievably harsh and unbelievably in violation of our lives on a daily basis. So yeah, we need to get rid of them.
Absolutely. We also need to remember what drove us to have this show, to focus on this in particular, is the huge number of lives that have been stolen by sheriff's violence, right? So Dijon Kizzee is one life that was stolen, and it's a name that we need to continue to say. And we know that there's been a pattern in this theft of life, right? So There's Dejan Kazee, there's AJ Weber, there's Ryan Twyman, there's Andres Guardado. And in each of these cases, and I'm lifting up those 4 because they were all killed in very close proximity. And what has happened is after they've stolen the lives of these people, right? Of Dejan, who, you know, was simply riding a bike, and anybody who watched the press conference, even the reporters were astounded when it wasn't Villanueva, it was like one of his underlings who said, well, you know, they stopped him because he was riding the wrong way down the street on a bike. I've never heard of that being, and the reporter said, well, what vehicle code did that violate? And the undersheriff said, oh, I don't know the name of the code. I'm not sure which code it was, because it's not it's a ridiculous so-called crime. Every little white kid who's learning to ride a bike rides the wrong way down the street so they can see oncoming traffic, right? If that's even the case, right? So they stole Dejan Kazee's life, but after they stole his life, they assassinated his character and dehumanized him. When we were out there that night, they left his body laying in the gutter for 18 hours, uncovered, without a shred of dignity, right? Without a shred of humanity. And what they did in their press conference is try to make him responsible for his own murder, saying, well, I can't read you his entire rap sheet. Let me say something. You wouldn't know who Dejan was if you hadn't stopped him illegally. There's no such thing, in my opinion, as a vehicle code violation on a bicycle. But the third thing that they did, and the third thing that they're doing, is attempting to criminalize the entire community who chooses to stand up, who has the bravery and courage to stand up and say, you will not kill our people this way, right? And I'm reminded today that it's especially important today that we lift up also Patrisse Richardson. I think this might be the 11th anniversary of her disappearance. Thank you, Rajay, for that note. Patrisse Richardson, who was also killed at the hands of LA County sheriffs, and who they attempted to criminalize after her body went missing, after they treated her with a complete lack of humanity, and she was ultimately killed. You remember that they sent her out into the middle of the night in Malibu, and with no purse, no cell phone, no money, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I believe, and then her body was found much later. There was some foul play. Her body had been proven to have been moved, and we think that even regardless of what happened, the technicalities of what happened, the sheriff's department is responsible for her death. And so it's important that we lift up those names. And I'm just saying that because some people think that we're engaged in this work out of political calling, right? But we're engaged in this work because the spirits of those on whose behalf we struggle demand that we be in this work. And so I think that what Paula is pointing to, Mama Paula is pointing to, is extremely important, because we are now looking at people finally seeing some of what it is we've been saying. So what came out today, and maybe you can summarize it very quickly for us, Mama Paula, what came out today in the Civilian Oversight Commission is that 3 of those commissioners called on Sheriff Villanueva to resign. Is that right? Can you take yourself off of mute?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that is correct. And I think that is, you know, very important, very significant, because that has not been done before. These are people we need to be listening to. These are people that are put in a position to represent us, represent civilians, and talk about what needs to go on in the sheriff's department. The sheriff has continued for months to try to ignore and avoid them, to try not to listen, but we need to listen. And I think it's very significant and very important that they did say today that he needs to go. that, not just them, but other entities have lost confidence in his ability to run the sheriff's department. And as you said earlier, Melina, a lot of people voted for him back in 2017, in that particular election. And they thought, and he also misled people because he made a lot of promises, said a lot of things that he had no intention of keeping. And one of the biggest things was that he said that he would not be working with ICE in the jails. He has even violated that particular promise. So, yeah, you were going to say?
So let's go to Patrisse on that. How did Villanueva dupe us, or dupe some folks into supporting?
He duped me. He didn't dupe you, but he duped me. I can't let history repeat itself, so I just gotta be honest, face the reality. A couple things, we had Sheriff Lee Baca, who resigned and then ended up getting federal charges and indicted and sent to prison. And for the entire, Los Angeles County, folks were truly disappointed in the department, didn't know if it was able to change. A bunch of people, after 100 years, were able to be candidates for the sheriff's department. We have the first time in history, in our lifetime, to be able to vote for a sheriff. And someone came out of the Long Beach Police Department, Sheriff McDonald, former Sheriff McDonald, and he sort of became sort of the progressive, however progressive he could be as sheriff. And when he got into office, he also couldn't keep his promises. In fact, he really completely started to ignore the community. And the community was really calling for him to discontinue, working with ICE. He was against Prop 47. He was against bail reform, and folks were like, we need him out. Sheriff Villanueva came out of, not being in sort of the top leadership. He was like an underdog, and many people rallied around him, including the progressive community, because he's the first Democratic sheriff. He's the first Latinx sheriff. He is all these first, and he talked a very good game. I mean, he literally lied to us. He talked a very, very good game. And I would say probably within the first 2 months of being in office, his true self, which is really, he is the union's boy, he's the ALAD's boy, his true self was revealed. And people started hearing how he talked about people who were incarcerated, how he talked about, folks who were inside the, folks who were incarcerated, how he talked about, criminals, and people started to be really concerned. Two things he said, that really got him into office was about closing the jails and not working with ICE. While he has now flip-flopped around the jail stuff, I mean, we've already won. The Men's Central will be closed, and we're not building any new jails. He went back and forth on that. He did go back and forth on ICE, but Mom Paula, just to let you know, just recently, like a week ago, he is now discontinuing working with ICE. But all of that happened because of community pressure. That's not because he's like a good human being or, good elected official. And it's because of community pressure. What he's done so many things, including rehiring deputies who sexually assaulted women inside the jails, bringing back deputies who have done actually illegal things and bringing them back to the ranks of the department. In some ways, Sheriff McDonald really did try to weed out, quote, bad apples, while Sheriff Villanueva slapped everybody in the face and brought many of those bad apples back into the department. So we are in a precarious position, I think, especially as people who don't believe in the police and are abolitionists. What do you do? What do you do with a sheriff who's elected? And what role do we play in challenging this current department? I mean, Sheriff Villanueva is not going to be the sheriff again. No way. There's no way that he's going to be able to be the sheriff in 2022. In fact, he may get recalled before then. He may get there may be folks who try to recall him. I've never heard an elected official call for resignation of another elected official in this county. I don't know if y'all have, I haven't. So this is he's pissed everybody off when the supervisors themselves, when commissioners, other mayors I've talked to have said that they don't want to work with him. He's awful. He's not a team player. He is through and through the police union. He is a representative of the police union.
Can you talk about that? So you mentioned ALADS. ALADS is the Association of Los Angeles Deputy Sheriffs. And we know that between ALADS and the Los Angeles Police Protective League, elected officials are really kind of beholden to these police associations that call themselves unions. With the case of Jackie Lacey, we know the ALADS and LAPPL together are spending about $10 million on her reelection. We know that they can finance entire elections. How does that impact Alex Villanueva? Because I've never heard an elected official be as brazen in his refusal to collaborate with other elected bodies. So when we think about the County Board of Supervisors, and some people are in LA County, some of our viewers are outside of LA County, the way in which many counties work is you have a Board of Supervisors that holds the purse strings for the county. But if you have an elected sheriff, that body actually doesn't have oversight capacity over the sheriff or over the district attorney, even though they hold the purse strings. So can you talk about what we've seen? But because they hold the purse strings in most locales, the sheriff will try to collaborate, will try to be amenable, will try to cooperate with the County Board of Supervisors, but Alex Villanueva hasn't done anything like that. Can you talk a little bit about his brazenness? I've never seen anything like this when he says, I don't even have to comply with your subpoena. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we haven't seen it like this in California. I think, many people have sort of seen this kind of brazenness in other places, like in the Midwest and the South.
Arizona.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Especially Arizona. So we have our own, brazen sheriff that really does believe that he is above the law. He is the law. And that has everything to do with the sheriff's union. Everything to do with the sheriff's union, because the sheriff's union acts that way towards the County Board of Supervisors and acts that way towards other elected bodies. This is actually the problem of the county and other elected bodies. It is time, and I'm glad to see it, but in some ways it's too little too late. Elected bodies have allowed sheriffs and specifically police unions and sheriff unions to behave poorly, to kill people with impunity, to create their own system that they live inside of, that they don't have to have accountability for. And mostly because many of our elected officials have also taken money from them. So they've been tied to this body, and so they've kept their mouths shut at the sacrifice of Black people and poor people in particular. And so now is a time of reckoning. I believe that with Sheriff Villanueva being in office and his behavior, our elected officials are now having to reckon with what role they've played and creating the system that we're in right now. And now they're saying, oh, they're also empowered by this movement, right? Where they could say, oh shit, yeah, we should not be playing with fire anymore. This should not be the way that we are existing. And so I do believe that, this should be a telltale sign to every single elected official that if you do not stand up to these police unions right now, this is what our future looks like. Our future looks like being controlled, not just by the police themselves, but by the unions who are also controlling the police and other elected officials. We have to get out of that dynamic. We have to, because people's lives depend on it.
I just want to highlight that point that you just made. Now is a time of reckoning, is what you said. Now is a time of reckoning. Absolutely, absolutely. I want to remind our Facebook viewers that if you drop questions in the comments, they're fed to me, and I'll make sure that we ask those questions. Mama Paula, can you just kind of further expand on the role of police associations keeping people like Villanueva in office and making him think that he's a king, that he is untouchable, that he can do whatever he wants, including, steal the lives of our people?
Yes, and the police unions control much of what happens in the sheriff's department, in the police department, because the kinds of contracts that they've been allowed to negotiate clearly protect the officers to any extent possible, so that even in situations, in going back over the history of gangs, and one of the first times that one of the gang's members was identified in the LA Sheriff's Department, and that particular 2 or 3 of them were fired. Their union at the time appealed, and those proven, documented gang members were returned to LA Sheriff's Department. They continue to work to this day. So these officers know they are protected. They know that no one will hold them accountable. And least of all, Villanueva will not hold them accountable, won't even blame them. And in many cases, does not even discipline. LAPD often tries to pretend that they're disciplined. Villanueva does not discipline. They can continue to do whatever and whichever, however they want to do it. And we, the people, are really suffering from this. As Patrisse said, they're stealing lives, they're harming people, they're terrorizing neighborhoods. And then today in the press conference, Villanueva gets up there and tries to demonize the entire community. He says that this community has one of the highest crime rates in the county. This community is like a war zone. So the reason that I send my officers there is because I'm trying to save lives. And we're like, come on. I mean, we truly are out of control. And as you both have said, this has to change. This is the time of reckoning. Not only do they control us here in LA County, but also, Melina, we've had the experience where they have extreme control in the state legislature, these unions, and prevent, in many cases, important legislation that can begin to chip away at some of the lack of accountability. So the control, the reach of these unions is phenomenal. And it is all to the advantage of the officers, not to the advantage of anyone else.
Right. And we know Villanueva is set to remain in office until 2022. Coming from Facebook is the question, how can we get him out of office before that?
We can recall him. It costs money. Recall campaign. It costs money. You got to get a bunch of signatures. We could recall him as soon as we get those signatures. They'll trigger a special election, and we can get him out of office. I think we need to call on other elected officials to ask for his resignation, to push him to resign. I think we need to get mayors and city council folks who are in places where the sheriff actually polices, Compton, West Hollywood, East Los Angeles. There's so many places that are unincorporated and incorporated cities where they police. We can get folks to say, we want him out of office. Obviously, the calls have been coming from the community for a year now, so this is not going to be new. Email, call, tag your elected official, and tell them to call for Villanueva to resign. He is a disaster, and he is a crisis and a tragedy for our communities. He needs to be out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I just want to, because it's on my spirit, say the name Paul Rhea, say the name Jamal Simpson. These are both people who were killed on Villanueva's watch, of course, Anthony Vargas. And so we want to make sure we say those names. The other thing that's coming up in the questions is people are really interested in this role and are, I think, taken aback a bit by the role of police associations who disguise themselves as unions, who have an influence, excuse me,
Bless you.
thank you, who have an influence not just on getting the sheriffs elected, but I think one of the reasons why so many elected officials are quiet in the midst of Villanueva's misleadership is because they're also taking money from ALADS, from LAPPL. What can we do to get cop money out of elections, period?
That's one of the things that's being discussed. It's very difficult, but to try to change our election laws or our laws about when people run for office, what the source of money can be. And it has already been suggested to remove, the possibility or remove unions and those kind of police associations from being able to donate to the campaigns of elected officials. And again, as with any of these changes, that's a long leap, but it is a beginning. And I think the more we begin to talk about these things and the more we begin to raise them up, we can begin to chip away at some of this. But yeah, the control of these unions is unbelievable. I mean, it is, when you start to try to figure out what's going on, it's just unbelievable.
Right. We just saw the impact that police associations had on even the legislative process, right? As we were trying to pass the Police Decertification Act, the Kenneth Ross Jr. Police Decertification Act. It was police associations that jumped up in the mix, that pressured legislators and said, no, don't vote for even the most basic of police accountability measures. That Decertification Act would have brought us in line with 45 other states. And I mean, it's a bare minimum that if police kill people, they shouldn't get to keep their guns and badges. That's all it said, right? And that we couldn't even get that to the floor for a vote because of the undue influence of police associations. Patrisse, I teach a class called Black Power. Real original name, right? But we just finished reading Black Power by Kwame Ture and Charles Hamilton. And the last chapter of the book talks about abolition. It talks about it in ways that I think people can really digest, right? Because it says, there's all of these corrupt systems. It's in that book where the term institutional racism is first coined. And then it says that, we should stop thinking about the language or using a strategy of reform. We need to search for new forms and new institutions that substantively change the way we approach phenomena, right? And I think that's kind of what you were saying earlier, right? When you talked about disbanding the LA County sheriffs, right? That takes in a radical imagination to say, with this entire system is problematic. It's beyond getting Villanueva to resign, because before Villanueva, we had McDonald. And the reason that you endorsed Villanueva is because McDonald was problematic. And before him, we had Baca and we had Tanaka and we had all of, it doesn't really matter what player you put in the seat because the system is corrupt. And so how do we move towards disbanding? How do we move towards abolition and a search for new forms? And I see it. Who's coming on? Is that Sister Helen coming on?
It is.
Hi, Sister Helen.
Our audio is still connecting.
Okay, so maybe you can address that, and then I'll introduce Sister Helen to the program with the last few minutes we have.
Perfect. Sure. There is no way that this current department, a department that its foundation is in racist policing, its foundation is in violence, torture, sexual assault, is going to be reformed. This is not a reformable system. This is a system that actually has to be dismantled. And we have to reimagine a new way of being in relationship to one another. We have to reimagine what accountability looks like. You know, so much of the conversation around abolition, everybody wants to start with, well, what do we do with the rapists and the murderers? But people don't actually talk about what do we do with people who didn't do anything at all, except for we're Black. What do we do with the reality that the communities that we live in are over-policed because they're poor? They're over-policed because they're Black. And so that's where we start when we talk about reimagining and abolition. We actually start with what currently exists. And then we always do talk about accountability. We know harm exists. We know violence exists. We know that the harm and violence isn't just coming from our communities. We know that harm and violence is how the police live their everyday lives in our communities. And so we need a new system. We need a system that is grounded in care and dignity and healing. And that is not going to happen with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. That's not even what they believe in. So we have to recreate something new, and we have to be bold and courageous enough to make it happen, and we could do it. So many places that look, Minneapolis is doing it right now. They are dismantling their police department. It's hard, it's complicated, but that's what happens when you're trying to build a new system.
Ashe, Ashe. I want to introduce Sister Helen Jones, one of the most powerful voices in this movement. Sister Helen Jones is the mother of John Horton. She's been in the struggle for, in the name of her son, for 11 years now, more than 11 years now. And we're grateful to have you on. In the last few moments of the show, I know you were on another call. We're grateful that you carved out the space to meet us. Can you quickly just introduce us to, or share with us what happened to John Horton, your son, at the hands of LA County Sheriffs, and how, in your view, we get justice?
Thank you for having me on. March 30th, 2009, my son, John Horton, was beat to death in Men's Central Jail. And his death was staged and covered up with a staged suicide by 10 3,000 boy deputy sheriff gang, killed him on the 3,000 floor. And the floor that he was killed on, these sheriff deputies, they known everywhere. They known to even beat their own deputies, their own officers. So that's how dangerous and how cruel they really are. And all 10 of these deputies been able to get away. Not only those 10, it was also one more that was in there. He never even got a chance to get looped all the way into the case, but we have him like in depositions and different other stuff where he said he also beat John, but he was never questioned until maybe 7 years, maybe 6 years into the case. He was just allowed to just go free, but they beat John to death. And for the last 11 years, I've been fighting, with Black Lives Matter and DPN to try to get, justice for John. And justice would look, I would never get justice. I would never get justice, but I feel like these police officers need to be treated just like everybody else. If y'all can go to jail, they should be in, we can go to jail, they can go to jail too. And that's what the whole thing, just being so unfair that none of these police is nowhere been held accountable for none of the deaths that they, people that they killed, people that they murdered. And a lot of people they murdered on purpose and still haven't seen a jail cell, still haven't been brought into the courtroom because they got these high profile attorneys that all of them use over and over again in different depositions. I see what this officer using and this officer using. So they got the best attorneys to keep them out of these jail cells. So getting justice, I think we'll never get justice for our kids, but I do want to see them held accountable and do time just like everybody else.
Well, we're so grateful that you could hop on, but more than that, Sister Helen, and I tell you this whenever I see you, we're grateful for your spirit, for your energy, for your vision, for your work, and for your brilliance and the way in which you lead all of us, that you inspire all of us to struggle forward. And you're right, You know, I don't know how you get justice for John. They already stole his body, but the work that you do, and it chokes me up every time, because the work that you're doing is for my son, right? It's for my daughters, so that, you know, we can get justice in John's name. We can invoke him into this struggle, and prayerfully, the children that we have that are still here, the Black people who are still here, will reap the benefits. We'll have the sanctity of our lives protected in John's name. And so I'm grateful for you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Sister Melina. I appreciate it.
So we're wrapping up this week's episode of This Is Not a Drill. I just want to quickly go around and get any last minute calls to action, any last minute thoughts. Let's start with Mama Paula. What is it that you'd like to close us out with, Mama Paula?
Yeah, I would like to close us out with being observant and involved in what is happening with the sheriff's department and the police department. So many times we don't know what's going on as individual citizens. And the more of us who speak up, the more of us who keep our eyes on it, the better it will be. So get involved with an organization. When you hear a call to action, when we start to begin to recall the sheriff, get involved.
Ashe. Sister Helen, do you have a closing thought for us?
The closing thought I have for everyone is, don't give up. Keep fighting. I don't care what what they try to throw in our way. We can't let them change our minds. We can't make them put us against each other. We got to keep fighting strong and keep protecting each other.
Ashe. Patrisse.
My last thoughts is, if you didn't believe in abolition before, just look at the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, and they will remind you why trying to reform a department over and over and over again does not actually work. We need new systems. We need an entirely new way of looking at accountability, at how we treat our community members, at how we love each other. And we need to get Sheriff Villanueva out of office while we get there.
Ashe. And I'll leave everybody with this, that the reason that they are stomping so hard, the reason that they are trying to get out there and force these false narratives down our throats, is because what we're doing is working. What we're doing is important. Being in the streets is essential. We have been in the streets in the name of Dijon Kizee since August 31st on a daily basis. Do not go home now. Listen to Sister Helen. Keep fighting. Here's one thing you can do right now. You can text the name Dijon, D-I-J-O-N, D-I-J-O-N, to the number 55156. Text Dijon to 55156, and that will take you to a petition to get the district attorney, Jackie Lacey, and all of these systems are in bed with each other. They're all bound up together. It will take you to a petition to get Jackie Lacey to prosecute the sheriff's deputies who murdered Dijon Kizee. The second thing we'd like you to do is don't believe the sheriff's narratives. Anytime they tell you who these people are, when they say, oh, the sheriffs are so great, and the Black people who live in South Central are criminals, know that they are lying, that usually the exact opposite of what they are saying is the truth, right? And so we need to think about, every time I've gone to 109th and Budlong over this last couple of weeks, we've been embraced. We've been in the midst of people who love each other and want the best for their community. And they have a vision of abolition, the way that Patrisse is talking about it. They have a vision that would bring in peacemakers and intervention workers and resources into community and push out the sheriffs that with regularity kills our people. And then the last thing that I'll ask people to do is amplify this word, that LA County Sheriffs is the most corrupt and murderous law enforcement unit in the nation. And I'm saying that as I sit in the city of Los Angeles where LAPD was the worst, right? Now we're looking at LA County Sheriffs, which has murdered, stolen the lives of 8 people since George Floyd was killed. So y'all up in an outrage over George Floyd, and we should be. But what about all these other 8 victims, right? These 8 victims whose lives were stolen right here in Los Angeles County. So spread that word that the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department is the biggest gang in the county of Los Angeles. And we need to make sure that we don't treat them as if they're saviors and heroes. We save ourselves. Our community keeps us safe. And we need to push Villanueva out. Please join us again. I didn't mean to close us out with such a long soliloquy, right? But hey, right? I want to remind everybody that every Thursday we'll be right here on Facebook Live, facebook.com/BLMLA. Next week, we're going to be talking about foster care as we enter into foster care month. And so we'll have Sister Lamika and Brother Chris hosting us next week. Please join that conversation again every Thursday at 7 o'clock right here for This Is Not a Drill. Thank you so much to our guests, Sister Helen Jones, Miss Paula Minor, Patrisse Cullors. We're thankful to Pro Bono ASL for being our partners on this and in everything that we've been doing. We're thankful to Philip, Rajay, and Megan for having the tech support, and thankful to all of our viewers. Please meet us in the streets. We'll see you virtually on Tuesday as we challenge the Los Angeles Police Commission and Torrance City Council. And on Wednesday, we'll be in front of Jackie Lacey's office saying Jackie Lacey must go. Jackie Lacey will go every Wednesday at 3 p.m. See you next week, inshallah.
Ashe.
Ashe.